says that in this study that Seattle has a tree canopy of approximately 28%. It's a figure that Rich Allison asked here in terms of what did that figure represent. He asked the city. Turns out that that's trees measured at 8 feet high. Well, 8 feet high means that the lilac in my backyard, the laurel bush, the laurel hedge, all those things, those are listed as, quote, tree canopy. They're not really tree canopy. Those are more the bushes that are out there. And so measuring stuff from space and looking down as to what has vegetation isn't really an accurate indication. But when Richard, who's right back here, Richard Allison asked the city to what was the value at 20 feet, which is what the U.S. Corps of Engineers uses, they came up with a figure saying, well, it's only 26%. So you get a variation. The thing is, the goal here that Seattle has proposed, which I also think you need to tell the city council is ridiculous, is that we're trying to get to 30% by 2037. Okay, that's like, 20 years away. It's less than 20 years now, at 18 years, but to go say we're going to get to 30% is ridiculous in terms of trying to make a real commitment to protect trees. And part of what you have here is a couple of things that you should look at in terms of dealing with this. We did get an update to the comprehensive plan recently in the environment area. I think this is part of what you use in talking to the city council. They asked two things, and it's surprising it's still there, but it says that they removed the no net loss per year, but they kept in achieve no net loss of tree canopy coverage and strive to increase tree canopy overall to 40%. So they left the 40% and not the 30% that they're trying for 2037. That was because the Urban Forestry Commission and others of us argued that we should be shooting for a higher goal. So this is part of what you point to them. The city council adopted this and say, what's happening during the mandatory housing affordability proposal you're doing, you're removing canopy, what's happening elsewhere around the city. How are you going to achieve that goal if you don't have a tougher control of what we're doing in terms of protecting trees? And Michael can probably give some more comment on the canopy cover.
Does Seattle have a tree inventory? No. What they have is a canopy cover assessment. You know that we have communications satellites in geostationary orbit starting at about 120 miles up. So the city of Seattle paid a contractor to buy the data set from one of these satellites, and they interpreted the data. Let's talk about what a tree inventory ought to be as part of the city's urban forest management plan, which had its name changed. Now it's called the Urban Forest Stewardship Plan. In 2009, when the Urban Forestry Commission was appointed, there was a working document that said that we cannot do anything until we know what we have. So here it is, 2009, that's 8 years later. 9 years and a couple months later, yeah. So do we know what we have? No. Here's how you know what you have with the tree. You stand at the base of the tree, you look at the ground, you look up. When you look up, you can see what kind of shape the tree is in. You write that down. Does our city council do that? Do they have that information? No. Do they require developers to collect this kind of information? Yes. When a developer applies for a permit for a multifamily housing project, he's required to do a tree study. And on that piece of paper is a circle of where the branches extend to, the location of the trunk, the name of the species, and the diameter of the trunk. They get their permit, they build their project, and what happens to that map? That map that the new homeowners had to buy, that map is thrown away by city staff. So if you have a law that says that you must give this information to the staff in order to receive a permit, and then that data is not rolled into the citywide tree canopy survey or tree inventory, that is misuse of public funds. That's like municipal fraud, friends. Now, I am not on the Urban Forestry Commission because I say that our government is engaged in municipal fraud. Now, Steve says much softer language, and he is on this official city advisory board. So that's kind of the reason why I'm not. Because I just call it as I see it. And if someone calls me on the phone, really common, how much would you charge to come over and prune this purple leaf plum that I have in my yard? You would not believe that I get calls like that all the time. These people are so out of it that they think that for free they can give a question to me and result in a meaningful answer, and the answer is just not meaningful. So what's happening in City Hall is based on a vacuum of pertinent data. And you pay these guys $150,000 a year to run your city. The mayor's assistants get $220,000 a year to run your city. And they just aren't doing it right.
City Light gets $360 a year to run your city.
And
We have a question here.
Before we get off of the tree canopy survey, we have an expert in the audience, and I just wanted to let Rich Ellison address how he noticed that the threshold was at 8 feet.
Oh, okay.
Rich, you want to just take this microphone for a second and enlighten us, please?
How did I know it was 8 feet?
How did you digest the canopy survey?
The city was having a kind of an online open house about the new survey they had done, which they had stated was almost 29% canopy cover. And so, being a biologist and somebody who's done plant surveys, I asked some questions about, well, what was the process of how you evaluated that? And they said, well, they had assumed that they can actually measure the height of the trees, and they were taking it at an 8 foot. So if you have a tree that's 8 feet tall, then that fell into part of the canopy cover. If it's 10 feet tall, it's part of the canopy cover. When I was doing surveys for the Army Corps of Engineers, the way they look at it is anything that's lower than 20 feet is part of the shrub layer. So if you've got a tree or a shrub that's between 8 and 20 feet, that's the shrub layer. And then if it's over 80 feet, over 20 feet, then that's part of the tree canopy. And so you had an herb layer, you had a shrub layer, and you had a tree layer. And so it became obvious that they were tweaking the numbers, trying to make it look good, because here you've seen a lot of trees getting removed throughout the city, and somehow the canopy is increasing. How is that possible? Well, because they're playing with the numbers. Now, one of the things they did say to me is that there's a program called iTrees, which I'd have to pass back to Ox to deal with. But iTrees apparently does use, in certain urban areas, 8 feet as a measure of tree canopy. And to me, that's a real bit of misinformation, because a tree that's 8 or 10 feet tall doesn't have much of a canopy on it. It will eventually have a worthy canopy, but this is how they're playing it. So it's not like they just simply pulled it out of the air. Their claim, and I have not researched that, but their claim was that iTrees uses 8 feet as a height. But I know that the federal government, and they're doing their service to the Army Corps of Engineers, 20 feet is the beginning of the canopy cover.
Thanks, Vic. Okay, let's get to our.
Yes, this meeting,
Hold it like an ice cream.
something that came out on this meeting advertised this discussion as a way, dealing with the use of trees to deal with air pollution. And I think everybody here is assuming that everybody in the audience understands that concept and they can move beyond. I actually don't know, I've been told that trees can help deal with air pollution, but that's all I know, and I would appreciate an explanation as to how that happens, and maybe if different trees and different heights impact that. I understand very well the ability of trees to prevent landslides, but please explain the air pollution.
So let's just start off with a little primer on photosynthesis. And in the 5th grade, we learned that trees give off oxygen, which is a lie. Trees give off carbon dioxide. And as a byproduct, the chlorophyll cells produce oxygen, and they produce a glut of oxygen. So actually, some trees give off more oxygen than carbon dioxide. So there is a complex scientific formula for photosynthesis, and one of the other byproducts is heat, one of them is sugar. So the sugar is the reason trees give off oxygen, so they can build sugar, and then they drink the sugar and they use that for their energy throughout the year for growing new leaves, growing seeds, growing new roots. But the thing that's relevant in this discussion, I did not have a part in writing the product announcement, and I believe that 2 or 3 cars can use up all of the oxygen that all of the trees in the neighborhood can produce. So it's commonly known that the plankton and kelp in the sea do most of the oxygen production for humans. But in our ordinance, there is no mention of the height of a tree. So if you were to take a Doug fir tree that's 150 feet tall and has 2.5 million needles on it, that Doug fir tree can be removed with no more consequence than a 6-inch diameter dogwood tree with 220 leaves on it. So what is better for society? Preserving millions of needles on a large tall tree, or preserving a couple hundred leaves on a small tree? In your letter, since everybody here is writing down things to include in their letter to the city council, add that the city should give more credit for large trees than small trees.
So there have been studies, there are studies out there that it's more than just producing oxygen. The trees actually do wind up removing other pollutants from the air. So it is a thing of helping to purify the air. And you do find that where there are more trees, and think air is healthier and people are healthier. The example was in the Guamish area. There's a lot of health problems, and part of that is they also have a very low tree canopy in that area. And they're working. One of the things the city's doing is trying to replant trees in those areas to help. Asthma is something that's cited as a specific factor, that there's a lot higher incidence of asthma in those areas where there are not trees than where there are trees. And the health impact of trees goes beyond just the sense of the pollutants in the air. I think there's psychological effects in others. They actually statistically prove, there's a study a couple of years ago with the emerald ash borer back in the east and all the trees that were killed there. A study statistically was done that looked very credible. It was published in one of the major journals of science that noted that when they removed all the other factors they could, that the correlation of the death of huge swaths of trees in the city, that the death rate basically increased in those areas. And they determined it was, a relationship there. And so those are the things that you look at. You try to look at what scientists say are involved. Also, trees are involved in runoff in terms of what goes down into our water, our streams. They help to reduce the runoff. They help to uptake some of that and change it into other compounds. So it is a thing that they're known to help reduce pollution from stormwater runoff also. So there are factors there. If you want to mention a couple of things, again, Michael, I just wanted to comment that, no, I'm not a mild voice where I am in terms of the city council or the Urban Forestry Commission. I'm doing what I can. I think that part of the thing we need to realize is that there needs to be some people that are screaming at them. There also need to be some people saying, hey, you know, where they do good things, you acknowledge that they're doing good things. And I think you have to say that, to thank the city, yes, you did this tree regulation report, even if you kept it secret, but they did release it and they are responding to it. And I think the thing is that part of it is that people have to, as Michael has said, is that you've got to get your input into those city council members and the mayor to say this is a priority. If you're not doing that, they're going to assume everything's all right. It's who raises the voice that winds up getting heard. And so you've got to say that yes, you're concerned, yes, you want to see things done. Two other things quick is that the Urban Forest Stewardship Plan is on a 5-year cycle, and this is a year that will be updated. And so one of the things that you can look at is helping to participate in that process and putting comments in. One of the things I would recommend is that you say we need to get to 30% tree canopy within that 5-year period rather than waiting 20 years. In other words, you know, push the button, put pressure on them to say that's ridiculous, waiting 20 years to just add 2% or even the 4% as Rich says, depending on what level you're working at. And the other point is that the Urban Forest Commission actually has 5 positions that are opening up. One of them is for a neighborhood involvement. So look at that. One is for an arborist. There are positions available where people can get input in, and the Urban Forestry Commission has been driving a lot of what's been going on within the city, pushing them for tree permits, tree replacement, canopy impact studies, etc. The other thing that Friends of Seattle's Urban Forest and Tree Pack would like to try and push as an idea is that we may not be able to do a whole city inventory, but we're looking at, as David said, the city has said there are approximately 6,000 trees in the area that are very large trees in the city of Seattle. That could be a 5-year priority to put those into an inventory, work with SDOT, because they can update their program to put trees on the property, but look at where those 6,000 trees are, and that would be a starting point to monitor, because rightly, as Michael said, the big trees are what provides the most benefit to the city. A lot of little trees, they're not going to do much at all. It's like an ornamental display of trees. But it's the big trees that do the hard work for the city that we need to maintain and allow to grow. And so that is another issue I would urge people to comment to the city on.
Just a couple points on the filtering. The trees leaves, they have mouths. They're actually in Latin. They're called stomata. And when it's not freezing or really hot and dry, they close. But most of the time, they're breathing, and they actually absorb toxic gases and particles. So that's the physical process for how trees do that. As far as the politics, I guess I'm kind of somewhere in between these guys, but being somebody who appeals and sues them and does, gets in their face, the consequences, I have some influence, but on the other hand, I can never get appointed to a damn thing down there. And that goes to following up on Michael Oxman's point about sending in letters. I think that who talked about Diane Sugimura's developer-oriented? Yeah. And how did she get there? Who appointed her? Who fired Jim Deers? The electoral process is the bottom line, and if we don't get people elected, make these issues part of the decision process of the voters when they fill out the ballot, instead of, can I park my car, kind of stuff, then we're going to not succeed.
Okay.
Well, I have one tiny brief statement and then a question. I live here in this neighborhood, and over the course of the last, I will say, 10 years, our biggest trees, 3 trees that I can think of, were cut down. One was probably 48-inch diameter Douglas fir, the other was about 36, and the other was an absolutely gorgeous hemlock tree, which probably had a 30 to 36-inch diameter. In each of those cases, I talked to the homeowners and I said, why are you cutting down that tree? And each of them responded that it was a fear of liability, of harm, of it falling. And I was trying to assess, is that coming from their insurance company, from them, from their neighbors? Also trying to assess, is that really the whole answer, or are they really looking for a new view? And so the question that arises in the proposals, is there a way to incentivize preservation by minimizing risk? I'm thinking like an insurance pool, or pressure on the insurance companies, or release from liability if it were to take down a power line, or maybe have the city have its own insurance pool and everybody pay $5 each, and then maybe if the homeowners didn't have that reason or excuse, I don't know what it really is, to cut down the biggest and best of our trees, maybe that would help some support. And I was wondering if your ideas or thoughts on it. Are there such programs, or could there be a program?
Well, I actually have a response to that, and I'll tell you the anecdote from my personal situation. I live in a house in West Fremont that faces west. There is a just over, I've measured it very carefully, it's just over significance Doug fir, and it's very healthy, and it's 6 or 8 feet onto the lot to our north, and it has big branches that come over to our side. We have a bunch of glass on the front of our house, and we've been there for 20 years, and the first few years we had a hell of a time staying cool in the summer, as the green keeps growing in front of our house, wisteria and everything else, including the fir. Stuff stays cooler, and it shades us in the hot summer afternoons. So one thing is to educate owners that, and just do general education, that having tree canopy is going to help as the climate gets hotter and drier in the summers around here. It's going to be less unpleasant. I think that having, as far as your specific question and liability, I think that the ordinance should be written so that you have to prove with a certified arborist that has been approved by the city, as Michael suggests, and not just some fly-by-night yo-yo with a chainsaw from Arlington, that it's a hazard tree and poses a threat to human life or is going to smush somebody's house. Other than that, a 40-inch Doug fir should not be allowed to be cut, period, unless you've got some really overriding reason. And the fear of it falling, if you can't justify it, I don't think that's an excuse. But I'm not a home liability attorney, so I'm sure it's
It was cut within the last 10 years. That was an illegal removal because anything over 30 inches is an exceptional tree for a Douglas fir.
anything, everyone. And having worked in the woods for years now, what did you say that the hemlock was 30?
The hemlock was huge. It was right here behind the...
Well, you know, Doug firs live 400 or 500 years, and they get really big and very healthy. Hemlocks get to a certain point, and they just stop, die, and fall over. So I'd be a little bit more, concerned.
I think the question was that there's a lot of heavy-handed approaches on homeowners, and we're told things by ordinance you have to do or can't do. If we could come up with a way to incentivize it or take away that argument, it, I think, would help gather support. And that was just my idea.
But I don't think that the city council is going to have an easy time threading the needle of relief of liability. That's going to be a state law issue. I'm just guessing.
I mean, the western hemlock, they mention it here, is like 24 inches is exceptional. And the other thing is, and Michael rightly say, is that trees also need tree care. like where you become liable is, for instance, if branches fall off and it's in bad shape, you're not taking care of it, then you can become liable if you have a hazard tree and you don't remove it. You know, and if it is a certified hazard, then it can be removed, but the problem we have in Seattle is, among other things, is that removing that, there's no requirement you replace it. If it's a smaller tree, technically you're supposed to replace a large tree, but again, if nobody files a complaint, nobody knows, there's nobody saying that they're going to replace it in any type of, you know, equivalency of planting a new tree, even if it takes years for it to grow, if nothing's being replanted. Because like the city, because I had that in the neighborhood, I have a rental house, and we looked down the street and they were removing a Douglas fir tree, and I thought first they were trimming it. Then we went down and looked, you know, talked to them, and it was, no, the city had said they thought it was a hazard too close to the power line, even if it was on private property. They said, we're gonna give them a tree to replant. You know, we're doing it, and they did it free, I think, taking it out. But the thing is, the tree was never replanted. It just, once it was down, it was gone. The same things happened in my neighborhood. There's a big leaf maple and some other trees, big ones that were removed. They were never replanted.
The process includes a new credential for arborists called Tree Risk Assessment Qualification. So down at City Hall, those guys know nothing about trees, and so they look around at some authoritative resource that they can point at and say that their decision-making was sound because they looked at this TRAC certification, Tree Risk Assessment Qualification. So TRAC is basically the science of predicting whether a tree will fall over or cause damage or branches break off or have problems. So the one thing that you can do is to make sure that the professionals that you deal with are TRAC qualified. I'm TRAC qualified. You actually have to be TRAC to really be in the tree business anymore. And then on the other end, I don't know who it was recommended these trees be taken down, but there is this new category in all of the advertisements called industrial athlete. And untrained arborists with chainsaws are industrial athletes. And that is the dumbing down of the arborist industry. So, thank you for expressing that concern.
That's the reason why to say anyone who does tree care work in the city should be a qualified, you know, arborist, certified, etc., or they shouldn't be doing work.
Something here. So I have, actually this doesn't sound like it's on. I have a question, and I have to preface it with a little bit of information. So I was looking at the,
Hold it like an ice cream cone.
looking at the tree canopy assessment. I don't know if this is working. No. Let's get rid of it. So one thing that's really interesting, if you haven't gone and looked at it, because you can find your own neighborhood and find out what canopy percentage you have in your own neighborhood. And so, you know, I of course pull up my neighborhood since I can't take on the whole city. And our canopy level's at 23% right now. And I live in Wallingford in an urban village. And for anybody who's not familiar with urban villages, that's where the upzones will happen. And some urban villages include lots of single-family zoned areas, and other urban villages don't. I live in a single-family zoned area in the urban village, and so I decided to start doing my own tree inventory. So I took the urban village map and I started marking the locations of trees, and what I used as a reference point was any tree that was taller than a telephone pole or about as big around was what I counted. If it was smaller than that, sometimes it was just hard to see because of houses, but I didn't put it on here. And so in the little strip that I did, it comes up to be like 5 blocks long and a half a block wide. And in that area there's 54 trees that are taller and bigger around than a telephone pole. A few of them are exceptional, some of them, you know, most of them probably aren't considered exceptional. But my real question is, this area is, as part of the upzone would go to low rise, and we would have a 5-foot perimeter around each building. And so